There comes a defining moment in the journey of nearly every person who has endured narcissistic abuse. On the surface, it may seem completely ordinary, almost invisible to everyone around you. Yet inside, it feels as though the foundation beneath your feet has suddenly shifted. It is the instant when the individual who spent so long shaping your perception of reality finally realizes something unsettling. They realize that you truly see them, not the carefully crafted image they presented to the world, not the charm they relied on, not the role of the wounded hero, the misunderstood partner, or the endlessly patient friend they convinced others they were. You now recognize the pattern. You recognize the manipulation. You see the strategy hidden beneath every display of affection and every carefully chosen word. The moment that happens, something changes behind their eyes. The illusion they fought so hard to maintain begins to crack, and they know it. Perhaps you noticed it as an unexpected chill filling the room. Maybe it appeared as an awkward pause in the middle of a conversation or a brief flash of panic behind their normally composed expression. It could have been something even more subtle, a slight shift in their voice, a moment of hesitation before responding, or a look that lingered just a little longer than usual. That single moment becomes one of the most significant and one of the most dangerous turning points in the entire experience of narcissistic abuse. Understanding what follows can dramatically influence the course of your healing. So much depends on recognizing what is actually taking place. Survivors who identify this moment for what it truly is often protect themselves far sooner than those who overlook it. Before moving forward, if your goal is to protect your peace, rediscover your identity, and understand the deeper psychology behind manipulation, consider following this channel. Everything shared here is rooted in genuine psychological understanding, trauma-informed perspectives, and the real experiences of survivors who are learning to trust themselves again. By staying connected, you continue gaining insights that quietly rebuild your inner world, one truthful realization at a time. You also become part of a community that chooses clarity instead of confusion and self-respect instead of self-doubt. Now let's return to that critical moment. What happens inside a narcissistic person when they realize you finally know the truth is far from random? It follows a pattern that appears repeatedly, although the details may differ from one individual to another. The timing can vary depending on the person and the circumstances, but the underlying process remains remarkably consistent. At the core of narcissistic behavior lies a powerful need to defend a carefully constructed self-image. That identity depends heavily on the approval, admiration, and perception of other people. It requires constant reinforcement to remain intact. When you begin seeing beyond that carefully maintained image, you stop reflecting the version of themselves they rely on for emotional stability. From their perspective, you become a threat, not because you are cruel, not because you are confrontational, but because your clarity shatters the mirror they have been using to support their fragile sense of self. Once that mirror begins to break, their response is rarely calm or measured. Instead, it often unfolds through several recognizable stages. Sometimes those stages appear quickly, other times they develop gradually, but the sequence itself is surprisingly familiar. The first change you may notice is that the very behaviors which once kept you uncertain suddenly become more intense. Gaslighting grows stronger, more frequent, and increasingly sophisticated. Conversations you remember with complete clarity are rewritten right before your eyes. Events you documented are denied as though they never occurred. Feelings you openly expressed become labeled as exaggerations, overreactions, or imaginary grievances. You may even begin questioning your own memory, despite knowing exactly what was said and exactly what happened. This escalation is deliberate, whether or not the person is fully aware of doing it. It does not mean your understanding is inaccurate. It means your growing clarity has become something they simply cannot tolerate. The more certain you become about what is happening, the harder they work to undermine your confidence in your own perception. Your ability to see reality clearly is the one thing that charm alone can no longer control. Alongside the increased gaslighting, blame shifting and projection usually become much more obvious. Behaviors they themselves displayed suddenly become accusations directed toward you. You are labeled as manipulative. You become the emotionally distant one, the unstable one, or the person unwilling to let go of the past. You may even hear the exact same words you once used to describe their actions repeated back at you as descriptions of your own behavior. This is not always a calculated lie. In many cases, it grows from a powerful psychological defense mechanism that prevents them from accepting the version of themselves your awareness now reflects. Rather than confronting those uncomfortable traits, they unconsciously assign them to you. It becomes a way of protecting their identity by placing the emotional burden onto someone else. For survivors, this can be one of the most confusing parts of the entire experience because you suddenly find yourself defending against accusations that perfectly mirror the harm you originally endured. Eventually comes the performance of victimhood. This stage is particularly unsettling because the very person who caused your pain begins presenting themselves as the one who has been deeply wounded. They may cry, their voice may soften, they may describe their own suffering in vivid detail. They might revisit stories about their childhood, ongoing stress, emotional fragility, or fears of being abandoned. They speak about feeling misunderstood, about how hard they have tried or how much they have sacrificed, while the damage they inflicted is quietly left out of the conversation. It is important to recognize that genuine emotional pain can certainly exist within a narcissistic individual. However, the timing of these emotional displays often reveals their true purpose. They tend to emerge precisely when accountability is approaching, when your awareness is strongest, and when you are closest to leaving the relationship behind. The victim narrative may not feel dishonest from their perspective, but it repeatedly appears whenever their control begins slipping away. It often functions more like an automatic psychological defense than a carefully planned strategy. If portraying themselves as the victim no longer succeeds, intimidation frequently becomes the next response. Sometimes that intimidation is direct and unmistakable through raised voices, threats, anger, or physically intimidating behavior. Other times, it appears in much quieter forms, such as prolonged cold stares, extended silence, subtle warnings, or a sudden withdrawal of warmth and affection that feels unmistakably like punishment. The silent treatment, in particular, remains one of the most psychologically destabilizing tactics because it activates the nervous system's deep fear of abandonment while offering no opportunity for genuine resolution. There is no conversation to continue, no disagreement to work through, and no problem that can actually be solved. There is only silence, stretching on until it feels almost impossible to bear. It is a form of emotional pressure meant to make you question your own decision to finally recognize what has really been happening. Many survivors describe feeling as though they are being punished simply for seeing the truth. Then, almost unexpectedly, the warmth returns. This is often the stage that leaves survivors feeling the most confused. After the anger, after the silence, after the harshness, the narcissistic person may suddenly become the kindest and most affectionate version of themselves you have ever experienced. This pattern is commonly known as hoovering, a term used to describe the way this behavior draws you back into the relationship like a vacuum, pulling you straight into the same destructive cycle again. The compliments become more intense than ever before. The apologies sound heartfelt, sometimes even carefully rehearsed. The promises to change appear almost convincing, especially if you have spent a long time hoping to hear those exact words. There may be thoughtful gifts, dramatic gestures, reminders of special memories you once shared, or sudden displays of vulnerability that seem to prove they can finally become the person you always believed they could be. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms in human psychology. It is the very same process that keeps someone pulling the lever on a slot machine, hoping the next attempt will finally bring a reward. Rewards that arrive unpredictably after periods of emotional pain create stronger emotional attachments than consistent kindness ever can. That is why trauma bonds can feel almost chemical in nature, almost like a force of gravity, even after you completely understand what has been happening. Discovering the truth does not instantly erase the conditioning that has developed over time. Understanding this is important because many survivors blame themselves for finding it so difficult to leave, even after they clearly recognize the reality of the relationship. They wonder why clarity alone has not set them free. They wonder why their heart continues to long for someone their mind already understands is harmful. The answer is not weakness. The answer is that your nervous system has been shaped by months or even years of unpredictable emotional experiences. It has learned to connect relief, hope, and emotional closeness with the very person who caused the pain in the first place. That connection was formed slowly, and it also takes time to carefully undo it. Healing requires more than simply understanding everything intellectually. It demands patient, consistent work to retrain your body's response to that emotional bond, one small step after another. Meanwhile, outside the relationship itself, another pattern often begins to appear. Their concern with maintaining a certain image becomes stronger and stronger. The narcissistic person grows increasingly focused on how they are perceived by other people, whether those people are mutual friends, relatives, coworkers, or even strangers online. You may begin to notice subtle stories that quietly present them as the reasonable person while portraying you as the difficult one. This shift often happens so gradually that the people around you barely recognize it taking place. In more severe situations, it develops into a full smear campaign where carefully crafted stories are spread throughout your shared social circle. The goal is rarely simple revenge. The deeper objective is to control the narrative before your version of events has the opportunity to be heard. If they can shape other people's opinions of you first, it becomes much easier for them to dismiss your truth later, sometimes before you have even spoken a single word in your own defense. This is often when survivors experience an overwhelming sense of isolation because people they once trusted begin treating them differently, sometimes without ever explaining what changed. It is painful. It is deeply confusing. And it is one of the most important moments to remember that the truth does not require everyone else's agreement in order to remain true. Your reality does not become less valid simply because someone else chose to tell a different story. Your healing does not depend on convincing everyone around you about what happened. It depends on trusting what you know and continuing to live according to that truth, even when nobody else confirms it for you. If any part of this feels familiar and you want to continue building the kind of inner clarity that manipulation cannot easily shake, take a moment to follow this channel. This space exists for survivors who are ready to move beyond confusion and develop a deeper understanding of themselves, their relationship patterns, and the psychology behind everything they have experienced. Every video is created to help you reclaim another piece of yourself that was slowly taken away and rebuild your life on a foundation that cannot easily be shaken again. Now, let's shift our attention inward, Because while the narcissistic person's behavior certainly matters, what is happening inside you during this stage matters even more. When you first recognize the manipulation for what it is, the feeling is rarely one of simple relief. More often, it becomes a confusing mixture of clarity and grief, awareness and uncertainty, validation and disorientation, all happening at the same time. You may feel as though you are waking from a dream you cannot completely remember, with scattered memories suddenly fitting together in ways that are almost painful to accept. This is completely normal. Your mind is reorganizing itself around a truth that once felt too unsafe to fully acknowledge. Naturally, it takes time for your emotions and your thoughts to catch up with one another. At first, clarity often feels frightening rather than empowering because it asks you to grieve far more than the relationship itself. It asks you to mourn the version of reality you genuinely believed you were living. You grieve the person you believed they were. You grieve the future you imagined the two of you would share. You grieve the energy, love, and years you invested in something that was never entirely what it appeared to be. You grieve the parts of yourself that you slowly shrank or reshaped simply to keep the relationship functioning, the opinions you softened, the needs you pushed aside, and the instincts you repeatedly ignored. Beneath all of that, you may also grieve the version of yourself that existed before this experience changed you, the person you were before you learned to question your own mind. This grief does not mean you are weak, and it does not mean you are confused. It simply means you are processing something deeply real, something that deserves to be acknowledged instead of hurried past. Alongside that grief, you may also notice an unexpected wave of self-doubt, almost the exact opposite of what you imagined would happen. You finally recognize the truth. Yet somehow you begin questioning yourself more than ever, wondering whether you are being too critical, too emotional, or too quick to draw conclusions. This happens because long-term exposure to gaslighting trains your nervous system to distrust its own internal signals. Even after your mind has connected every piece of the puzzle, your body may still hesitate at the thought of trusting what you genuinely feel. Healing from this is not about forcing yourself into certainty. It is about slowly and consistently choosing to trust yourself again through small, repeated moments until self-trust becomes something natural and steady instead of something you have to struggle to create every single time. After experiencing manipulation, rebuilding confidence in your own thoughts and feelings does not happen through one major realization. It happens through countless small moments where you remind yourself that your perspective matters, your emotions are valid, and your memory deserves to be respected. Over time, these small choices begin creating a stronger connection between you and your own inner voice. This is also why writing things down can become one of the most quietly powerful habits during the healing process. Keeping a record of events as they happen, making notes about important conversations, writing down your emotions in the moment, and capturing your thoughts before they become influenced by someone else's interpretation can create an external memory that belongs only to you. Even a simple note, a specific date, a short description of what happened, or a few honest words about how you felt can become a grounding point later when confusion starts to appear. This practice is not about collecting evidence to attack someone or creating a reason to stay trapped in the past. It is about creating a connection with your own reality. It is about having something stable to return to when manipulation attempts to create doubt around your experiences. When someone repeatedly questions your perception, minimizes your feelings, or changes the story of what happened, having your own written record can remind you that your emotions and memories did not appear out of nowhere. They came from real experiences that affected you. This simple habit is one of the most overlooked tools in recovery from narcissistic relationships because it slowly repairs the relationship you have with your own judgment. It teaches you to listen to yourself again. It helps you recognize patterns that you may have ignored before. And as you continue healing, you begin developing a stronger ability to separate genuine accountability from manipulative displays that only appear when someone wants something from you. Understanding this difference can become one of the most freeing lessons you ever learn. Genuine accountability has a completely different energy. It is consistent, patient, and demonstrated through actions rather than only words. It does not appear only when someone fears losing access to you. It does not suddenly arrive when consequences become unavoidable. Real accountability does not make the conversation about their pain while ignoring the damage they caused. It does not pressure you to forgive quickly or demand that you move on before you are ready. True accountability accepts discomfort. It understands that healing takes time. It shows itself through changed behavior that continues even when nobody is watching. It appears through patience with your emotions, respect for your boundaries, and a willingness to accept responsibility without trying to escape the consequences. It does not require constant recognition or praise. It does not need an audience to prove that it exists. Instead, it quietly continues because the person genuinely understands that change is about becoming different, not simply appearing different. Manipulative performance often looks very different. It usually carries a sense of urgency. It needs an immediate emotional response from you. It wants you to soften your position quickly. It wants the connection restored before enough time has passed for real change to be proven. It often uses emotional vulnerability as a strategy rather than as an honest expression of growth. The timing of these performances can sometimes feel almost perfect because they appear exactly when they have the greatest emotional impact. They may happen when you are finally stepping away, when you are beginning to heal, or when the person realizes that their previous methods are no longer working. Suddenly, there may be apologies, promises, emotional messages, or dramatic expressions of regret. But the question is not whether someone can say the right words in one emotional moment. The question is whether their behavior continues to match those words over time. Once you learn to recognize this difference, emotional intensity begins to lose its power over you. You stop confusing strong emotions with genuine transformation. You stop believing that a powerful conversation automatically means a person has changed. You begin looking beyond the moment and paying attention to the pattern. You may also begin noticing cycles of temporary improvement that often appear after someone feels exposed or after they realize they might lose control of the relationship. A narcissistic individual may suddenly seem different for a period of time. They may become more affectionate, more understanding, or more willing to communicate. They may read books, attend therapy, learn psychological language, or speak about healing and personal growth. For a while, it can genuinely feel like something has shifted. You may start wondering if this time is different. You may begin hoping that the relationship can finally become what you always wanted it to be. That hope is completely understandable because people naturally want to believe that someone they cared about can grow and become healthier. But slowly, sometimes after weeks, months, or even longer periods, old patterns can begin returning. They may not appear exactly the same way as before. Sometimes they return in more subtle forms. Sometimes they become harder to recognize because they are hidden behind new words, new explanations, or a more carefully controlled image. This does not always mean that every moment of change was completely fake. Sometimes a person may genuinely experience temporary motivation to improve. However, temporary awareness is not the same as deep transformation. Real change requires consistent inner work, humility, and a willingness to continue growing even when there is no reward, no attention, and no guarantee that someone will stay. True transformation is usually quiet and gradual. It does not constantly announce itself. It does not demand recognition for every small improvement. It does not need someone else to validate it. It simply becomes visible through consistent choices over a long period of time. Real growth is not something that appears only during a crisis. It becomes part of who someone chooses to be. While all of this is happening, protecting your nervous system becomes just as important as understanding the behavior of the other person. Emotional regulation is not something unnecessary or optional during recovery. It becomes an important part of rebuilding yourself. When you have lived through constant uncertainty, emotional pressure, or repeated invalidation, your body may have learned to stay in a state of alertness. Healing involves slowly teaching yourself that you are allowed to experience safety again. Simple practices can support this process. Slow and intentional breathing, grounding yourself through your senses, spending time outside, moving your body gently, creating moments of quiet, getting proper rest, and reducing constant emotional stimulation can help your nervous system return to balance. These practices do not need to be complicated, expensive, or perfect. Healing is not created by doing everything correctly. It is created by consistently offering yourself moments of care. Even small moments of peace can create meaningful changes over time. A few minutes of calm, a quiet walk, a moment of reflection, or simply allowing yourself to rest without guilt can remind your body that it does not always need to be prepared for the next emotional storm. You do not need to force yourself to heal faster. You need to create the environment where healing can naturally happen. Recovery does not follow a strict schedule. It moves through different stages, different emotions, and different seasons. Some days may feel stronger than others, and that does not mean you are moving backward. Healing follows rhythms, not deadlines.